welcome and good evening, everyone. Very, very warm welcome to all of you to Powering a Livable Planet, Saskatchewan's Cold Decision on Trial. A special hello to folks joining us from across Saskatchewan, but also from across all of what is known as Canada or Turtle Island. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We do not take it for granted. We truly appreciate it, and we hope you get the value that you're looking for. Um, who am I? I'm Mario Wahba. I am the Climate Justice Policy Analyst at Citizens for Public Justice, or what is known as CPJ. CPJ is based in Ottawa, Ontario, on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. And I want to acknowledge the ongoing stewardship of this land and express our commitment to advancing justice, reconciliation, and right relationship with creation and with one another. So we'll very briefly cover the timing and order. We'll start with short presentations from our legal counsel, then our co-applicants, the people at the heart of this case. Then we'll spend at least 20 minutes in Q&A or question answers. Please drop questions in the chat as they come to you, or if you have a good memory, which I can't claim, please remember your questions until the last 20 minutes. Some housekeeping. We are recording this session for those who registered but could not make it live. So please keep your mics muted unless you're called on or it's your time to speak. The chat is open though, so feel free to share respectful comments and resources there and even get into some discussions if you want. Run of show and speakers. We'll start with Glenn Wright. Glenn Wright practices law at Procedo LLP in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, having transitioned from a career as an engineer to focus on environmental litigation. Grounded in his commitment to climate justice, equality, and healthy democracy, Glenn is representing the applicants on a non-billable basis, believing in the importance of this application in strengthening the rule of law, ensuring that decisions on energy in Saskatchewan are transparent, justified, and aligned with achieving net zero electricity as soon as possible. And beyond advocacy and litigation, Glenn and his family have embodied the shift to clean energy on their farm, demonstrating how to reduce consumption and electrify heating and transportation in rural Saskatchewan. We'll hear from Glenn very shortly. Thank you, Glenn, for being here. Secondly, Peter Preble from the Saskatchewan Environmental Society. Peter Preble is a member of the board of directors of the Saskatchewan Environmental Society. Prior to retiring, he served as the policy director for the Saskatchewan Environmental Society. He has worked intensively on climate change issues for the past 25 years. Earlier in his career, Peter also served as a member of the Saskatchewan legislature. So thank you for that unique perspective and inside scoop that we're going to get, I hope, from you, Peter. Kike Duek, they, them, is a 12-year-old from Regina whose love for birds, mushrooms, and trees led them to become a climate change activist. They started an environmental club at their school, have become involved in the Cathedral Community Forest Project, and organize climate rallies at the Saskatchewan legislature. As their activism continues to grow and develop, they have made connections and partnerships with other environmental groups such as Break the Divide, EcoStress Saskatchewan, and Enviro Collective. They have also spoke about their climate work in the media through podcasts such as Climate Action Heroes and radio and print media by CBC Saskatchewan. Most recently, they worked alongside other youth and environmental and provincial opposition to present a climate change petition to the government during the spring sitting. They are motivated to be a part of this important legal action to continue to push the provincial government towards phasing out coal-based electricity. Thank you again for being here, Kike, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Kika will be followed by Matthew Weens. Matthew Weens is a farmer in Manitoba. Matthew hopes that his court action will be a wake up call to decision makers and will lead to a shift in mindset towards understanding the earth as a life support system to be cherished rather than a resource to be exploited. As a father and a farmer, the impacts of climate change are personal for Matthew. This summer, his children's sports activities were canceled due to frequent air quality alerts and extreme heat. Torrential rains and drought are also impacting his ability to grow crops and raise livestock. As a Manitoban, Matthew's involvement in this case represents how Saskatchewan's emissions from coal don't stay within the province's borders. They pollute the atmosphere that we all share and depend on. So thank you again for being here, Matthew. Really looking forward to it. And Sabahat Saeed is a fourth year medical student at the Saskatchewan campus of the University of Saskatoon. Sabahat is also the co-lead of CAPE Saskatchewan and is leading another university club amongst her to-be doctor students on the environment. So thank you for your activism, Sabahat, and I look forward to listening to your expertise. And last but not least, Sherry Olson. Sherry is a veteran and has lived in Treaty 6 territory and homeland, the homeland of Métis and all but a few months of her life. Living in rural Saskatchewan and now Saskatoon, she has raised her children and now focuses on community. As an advocate and supporter for environmental education community activities, Sherry is a co-host on From the Ground Up, an environmental podcast and radio show airing on CFCR 90.5 FM in Saskatoon. Thank you, Sherry, and I look forward to your speaking engagement. Without further ado, we'll jump in right away. And Glenn, over to you for the legal overview.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mario. Am I coming through loud and clear? Perfect. Well, as many of you will know, on June the 18th, 2025, the government of Saskatchewan announced its decision to refurbish and extend the coal-fired generation in the province to potentially up to 2050. And I'm going to refer to that as the coal decision throughout my submissions here today. So 30 days later, we filed an application seeking a judicial review of the coal decision, and we are also seeking an order to quash the decision and an order for an interim stay of the decision pending the determination of the case. So essentially, we were asking the court to strike down this decision and put any activity the government would move forward with on hold until the court had ruled. Unfortunately, though, the court didn't make any decisions that day, and we are now looking at a preliminary hearing that is going to happen on November the 10th, 2025, here in Saskatoon. So your first question may be, what is a judicial review? It's different than a statement of claim, which is what you often see people file in the courts. As a claim is where you're usually seeking damages from someone. A judicial review is more about the court using its supervisory capacity to review decisions made normally by administrative decision makers, but certainly the government's decisions can also be reviewed. And what the court does there is it takes a very focused look at the decision that was made and the record that the decision maker had, and just looks to see if the decision was reasonable or is in the realm of a reasonable decision, considering everything that was looked at. The other thing they can do is sometimes analyze decisions as to whether they're lawful or not. So in this case, we're suggesting that the decision made on the coal decision is both unreasonable and unlawful because it puts us on a path to violate federal law like the Clean Electricity Regulations and the federal coal-fired electricity generation regulations. So we're arguing that this coal decision is unlawful for many and unreasonable for many reasons. So I'm going to just share my screen here because I've got kind of all of the points put on one slide. I don't have very many slides, but I'm hoping this will come through. Are you able to see that now? Okay, good. So CPJ has some more information about the Cole decision. So if you actually want to read our materials, the documents we filed in court, you can find them by going to this website. But in a nutshell, we've got 5 reasons that we're arguing that this decision is both unlawful and unreasonable. The first one is, number one, is that the decision relies on irrelevant and inaccurate information with respect to costing. And they refer to the Economic Impact Assessment Tribunal's report, which looked at draft versions of the clean electricity regulations. But unfortunately, it was just draft regulations. So they never updated the economic impact assessment to consider the actual regulations as proclaimed. So from our perspective, that costing or economic impact assessment is irrelevant and inaccurate. The other thing is that there is no independent economic analysis of the costs to implement this Cole decision. So essentially, we view this as the government writing a blank check, and we think that's unreasonable. So the second reason why we think that this decision is unreasonable is that the 3-page letter from the government doesn't say anything about Canada's obligations under international law, things like the Paris Agreement or conventional or customary international law, um, um, doctrines like the precautionary principle, for example, or the principle of non-regression. So nothing is discussed with respect to international law in that letter. The third reason why we think this decision needs to be reviewed is because the Cole decision incorrectly determines the federal government's standing, or they say the federal government has no standing with respect to electrical generation in the province. And we think that is legally incorrect. The fourth reason is that the Cole decision fails to consider any implication on the charter rights of Saskatchewan citizens and more broadly of all Canadians, because the pollution that's going to be emitted by the coal-fired power plants running for another 20 years is going to make climate change worse. It's going to make health impacts worse for all Canadians, anybody who's downstream of the plume of pollution that comes out of those coal-fired plants. And the fifth reason, the last of my 5 points here as to why we're doing this, is that we view the Cole decision as a marked departure from more than a decade of commitment from the government of Saskatchewan to phase out coal power. And it can only be seen as an unreasonable decision without a more of a rational explanation as to why we're making such a fundamental change in direction to extend coal to 2050 with no public consultation. So, as I mentioned, we had our first appearance in court on August the 12th. We're now facing an application to strike the pleadings from the government of Saskatchewan. They're trying to argue this will be non-justiciable or it's not appropriate for the court to hear this case. So that hearing is scheduled to take place on November the 10th. The unfortunate part of this, though, is that in the meantime, our applicants are prejudiced because the government can continue to act on its decision. And based on the language in the letter of June 18th, we understand that work is beginning this year to restore Boundary Dam number 4 to service and to have the plant recertified. So since we weren't granted an interim stay of the Cole decision, that work may very well be ongoing right now, despite the serious concerns that we've raised in this application. Now, I know that many people have very different perspectives on this issue and us taking the government to court here. I can tell you that I've heard from many people, even before this Cole decision was released. For years, I had people asking me to start an action to pursue the government and get them to shut down the coal-fired power plants. So when the Cole decision was actually released, my phone and my email sort of lit up with all kinds of requests for people who wanted to see us take action and move forward with this type of court action. And I think the main reason that people want coal shut down is because it's the dirtiest form of energy available, and there are many health hazards associated with coal emissions beyond, the climate impacts. And organizations like CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, you're going to hear from them later in this call. They've done really great work over the last several years, more than a decade, in fact, in Alberta and other provinces to bring attention to the urgent need to phase out coal. And in fact, other provinces have already done this. So in Ontario in 2014, they ended their coal-fired generation. Manitoba did so as well, and Alberta did so in 2024. So if even Alberta can phase out coal, the applicants and myself, we think that we can do that here in Saskatchewan too. Now, on the other hand, since this action was filed, I've also had some messages come across, my social media and into my email from people close to Estevan and Coronach, and they're usually reminding me of 1,100 coal workers that will be directly impacted by this coal phase out. Now, I personally recognize that coal workers must be on an emotional roller coaster because for more than a decade, they've been told that their jobs are in jeopardy and the plants would be shut down. But here we've got this recent about face or turn that now they're going to defer that shutdown to more than 20 years. But I think we should remember that we're talking about a deferred shutdown. These jobs are still at risk. It's just a matter of when. So what we really need to look after these people is a transition. And I think we're going to hear more about that later on in this call as well. And after all, Estevan is the sunniest place in Canada and has some of the best wind resources in the world. And furthermore, we know that the government has already spent $20 million on coal worker transitions in the communities of Estevan and Coronach. So I wonder myself, how was that money spent and how many people have already been transitioned? And I think there are a lot of questions to be answered here, but what I want to convey to everyone on the call is that I do have empathy for those coal workers who are impacted, and I would like to see a fair transition for all of those families. And there are many other options in terms of generation, but let's be clear, all of this is a distraction away from the main issue. This court action is not about coal use in China, nor is it about whether we're going to have nuclear power in Saskatchewan in the future. This court action is focused solely on whether the decision that was made, the coal decision, whether it is reasonable or not. So what's particularly got me worried, I'm going to advance to the next slide here, if I can. Let's see. How do I do that? There we go. What I'm particularly worried about is how the rule of law is under attack throughout the world, but also here in Canada. And if you just look up, our Chief Justice, Richard Wagner, just in June here, he was talking, this is one of the headlines about how the rule of law is under attack worldwide and here in Canada. And we see that in our narrative and dialogue in the media. I mean, every piece of environmental law coming from the federal government in the last 8 years or so, they've all been challenged in court. And only the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act survived those court challenges and was deemed valid law by the Supreme Court of Canada. But despite the Supreme Court of Canada saying pollution pricing is valid law, our Premier of Saskatchewan defied the law anyway and refused to collect those pollution prices. Now, our Premier and our government of Saskatchewan has also implemented the notwithstanding clause to pass legislation that violates the charter rights of LGBTQ students. And now the province with this coal decision is putting us on a path to defy federal coal-fired regulations and the clean electricity regulations. So I find this to be very worrisome. And I think we need to remember what the Supreme Court of Canada said in the case on the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act. And I've got this quote up here that I think is really one of the most important things that came from that decision. And the stuff that's bolded is my emphasis here, but it bears repeating. Climate change is real. It is caused by greenhouse gas emissions resulting from human activities, and it poses a grave threat to humanity's future. The only way to address the threat of climate change is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So when I see our provincial government violating the law, I just tend to imagine to myself, what is our society going to become if our premier and citizens become entitled to pick and choose whatever law they follow? And in the prior slide here, the quote on the right side of the screen, the Chief Justice more than a year ago was saying he's concerned about disinformation. And I regularly see prominent politicians talking about how spreading disinformation, saying that EVs, for example, don't work, or that they're more polluting than gas cars, or saying that heat pumps don't work, or saying that forest fires are really just a problem related to arsonists. What we're constantly faced here is that we're constantly being distracted away from the undeniable reality of dangerous climate change. And that's why it's so important to remember this quote from the Supreme Court of Canada. And to me, I'm sort of wrapping up here, but Given the reality of the escalating climate crisis, there are going to be difficult tests on all of us ahead. And I wonder, are we going to be able to weather those storms? Will law and order be maintained? Can our system of governance evolve to respond and address our situation? So, to me, if we want to truly embrace the precautionary principle, which is one of those principles in terms of international law it's effective in Canada as well. If we want to protect human rights related to life and equality, we need to recognize this simple fact. And that is that to stop global warming, it is necessary to replace fossil fuels, and it is mostly sufficient to replace fossil fuels. So I'll close by just referring again to Chief Justice Richard Wagner of the Supreme Court of Canada. He stated that in Canada, we have a strong legal system. We have to defend those institutions. We should not take anything for granted. That's his quote. So from my perspective, I'm honored to be acting as counsel for these applicants who are challenging this cold decision and standing up for the rule of law in Canada. The climate crisis to me is very urgent, and we need all of our institutions, including the judicial system, to respond. And so these applicants, in my mind, are taking an important step for the benefit of all Canadians, and they're to be thanked for that. So subject to any questions later on in the presentation, those are my submissions. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Mario.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I really appreciate it. And I'll go ahead and share my own presentation. So at the end, you don't need to worry about that. And I'll dive into my presentation as well. Can you all see my screen? Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, I hope you can't see my notes, but I'll begin. As I mentioned in the beginning, my name is Mario Wahba. I was born and raised in Egypt, and I am the Climate Justice Policy Analyst at Citizens for Public Justice. And CPJ is a faith-based organization. Oh, sorry, you can't see my camera. Right. Okay, I'll open my camera. Here we go. CPJ is a faith-based organization that does public education, government relations, and advocacy on three main policy areas: refugee and migrant rights, poverty eradication, and climate justice, which is the reason why I am here today. So thanks again, Glenn, and thanks to everyone here, including workers and families whose livelihoods have been tied to coal and other fossil fuel industries. The purpose of my presentation is to talk about just transition. And I do want to convey that we see you, we hear your concerns, and a livable planet means a livable transition as well, one that honors people's contributions and secures good futures in the communities that kept the lights on for decades, whether in Saskatchewan or anywhere else in Canada. So what does CPJ mean by a just transition? And we actually at CPJ talk about this quite a bit over the years. At CPJ, just transition is about fairness and inclusion, centering marginalized communities like Indigenous peoples and Indigenous rights and leadership, making sure that marginalized communities are heard and ensuring that workers and families have clear and well-funded pathways into stable, lower carbon careers. CPJ has consistently called for inclusive transition policies that don't replicate past harms or exclusion. So just know that our emphasis in the climate justice fight is very much, even disproportionately so, on that aspect of just transition. So why phasing out coal matters? There are various reasons, and we'll get to hear many of them, as Glenn said, including by the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. But coal is widely known as the most carbon-intensive fossil fuel and a major source of air pollutants that drive heart and lung diseases, as we'll get to hear from Kate. Canada has committed to clean electricity rules that tighten from 2035. They were actually supposed to kick in by 2030, but the oil and gas lobby was very successful in delaying them to 2035, and work towards a net zero grid by 2050. This is a direction of travel for a reliable, affordable and clean power system. And again, a lot of folks are skeptical about the affordable piece, but time and time again, studies show that in more than 75% of circumstances around the world, adding new solar and wind is cheaper than to the grid is cheaper than any other source of electricity. So workers, we, as I mentioned already, have a disproportionate emphasis on how do we help transition workers away from the oil and gas industry into viable, decent paying jobs. So let's take the three sort of large demographics: young workers, mid-career professionals, and end of career pre-retirement. Our first idea is about how to help young workers who may have found their entry-level jobs into the oil and gas industry and transition to sustainable jobs. CPJ in many years have advocated for the Youth Climate Corps, which is a civil society proposed initiative that asks the federal government for $1 billion a year, and that Youth Climate Corps will create 20,000 positions annually at a living wage of $25 an hour. And these are hands-on, professional local jobs such as home retrofitting, heat insulation, solar and wind installation, ecosystem restoration, disaster response, and career sector roles that strengthen community resilience. So again, lots of transferable skills from mining coal, for instance, to mining rare earth minerals. Mid-career workers are upskilling folks who have had a few years under their belt, but are now looking for more, again, sustainable and lasting jobs. Upskilling and retooling these workers. Organizations like Iron and Earth are already helping fossil industry workers map transferable skills, which I've already mentioned, and move into clean energy roles with targeted training. This isn't hypothetical. Welders, electricians, heavy equipment operators, drillers, safety and logistics pros are all in demand across renewables, the grid build out industry, and building retrofits. So again, there's lots of transferable skills that could carry over from traditional oil and gas sectors to low carbon renewable sectors. Okay, what about folks? So jobs in the clean economy again would include mining critical minerals, grid and storage jobs, and safety and sustainability. So how can we achieve dignity for folks who serve their long careers in the oil and gas sector? And dignity for those near retirement is very, very important for workers who have given decades and are nearing the end of their careers. A just transition includes early retirement and bridging options funded by both the federal government and the oil and gas industry. And I know what you're thinking, but this is not radical. Sunsetting industries routinely design compensation packages that reflect the risk of short-term employment cycles, and the capacity is there. In 2022 alone, the five largest Canadian oil and gas companies, not all of the oil and gas companies, just five largest, posted a combined profit of about $38.3 billion. I'll repeat that again, $38.3 billion. So up higher, if you are focused on my presentation, I mentioned that civil society groups are asking the government for $1 billion to employ 20,000 people on a living wage. And yet the oil and gas sector has $38.3 billion, not in revenue, in profits. So if they do want to fund, again, early retirement options, bridging options, in order to help people who are about to retire, they can. We'll transition over to how we put justice front and center. Who's gaining and who's burdened by this? A just transition also addresses environmental racism and historic inequities. A research led by Dr. Ingrid Waldron, who came and spoke to us at Citizens for Public Justice, albeit it was in a different, the research was in a different province in Nova Scotia. That research documents very well how polluting sites such as landfills, industrial facilities, pulp effluent, and of course, fossil fuel generating plants have disproportionately burdened African, Nova Scotian, and Mi'kmaq communities, indigenous communities, with serious health impacts. Any transition that ignores these legacies isn't just. So as we will hear from Cape, we have to focus on that disproportionate impacts and where these plants are located in what communities in order for the transition to truly be just. Why Canada should lead? A lot of people want us to blame developing countries or China or India, as Glenn alluded to. Canada is a wealthy G7 economy and a top 10 economies by nominal GDP. On a per capita basis or per person, our emissions remain among the highest in the G20. By one analysis, second only to Saudi Arabia. So we're, our emissions per capita is the second highest in the world and among G20 members as well. Leadership means moving first and moving fairly. Again, there's a principle, a famous principle in environmental diplomacy called common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. And that, simply speaking, means that while both Canada and a country like Nigeria are fossil fuel exporters, you can't ask both countries to equally give up fossil fuel right now. Why? Because Canada has obviously historically benefited from burning and exporting oil and gas, while Nigeria, which should also, relatively speaking, reduce its oil and gas and greenhouse gas emissions, is still a developing country. So they don't have the capabilities to fund adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage as much as people in Canada do and are able. As much as that doesn't feel like the case for us sometimes. International inequities and disparities are real. So, closing notes, this legal action isn't just about stopping an unlawful coal extinction, it's about how we build a healthier, fairer economy, one that honors workers, protects health, and keeps faith with younger generations. That's the Canada that we all deserve. Thank you, folks, again. I appreciate you listening, and then I'll pass it on to Peter.
Hello, my name is Peter Preble, and I'm a board member with the Saskatchewan Environmental Society. We're an organization that was first established in 1970, and over the last 55 years now, we've been working on issues related to energy policy, climate change, promoting renewable energy. We established the first solar cooperative in the province. We were involved in source water protection, and of course, we've been advocating for many years for the phasing out of coal-fired power generation in this province, going back at least 15 years. We wanted to join this court action and be a co-applicant in it because we strongly believe that coal-fired power generation needs to be phased out as rapidly as possible. And because very clearly the government of Saskatchewan is violating federal law, which obligates every province to shut down all their conventional coal-fired power stations by December of 2029. One of the major reasons, of course, why we want to see coal phased out is its climate change impacts. Coal-fired power generation is the number one source of greenhouse gas pollution worldwide. And Saskatchewan is setting a terrible example for the rest of the world by refusing to phase out its coal-fired power plants in a timely way. The provincial government is well aware of the fact that the United Nations is urging all industrialized countries to phase out coal-fired power by 2030, and urging all developing nations to phase out coal-fired power generation by 2040. And of course, Saskatchewan is proposing to run its coal-fired power stations into the 2040s. So it's a terrible example for the rest of the world at a time when we face a climate emergency. In Saskatchewan this summer, we've had now in the last 3 years, we've had 2 years of record wildfires in this province, and of course, record wildfires across our country. And the provincial government is turning a blind eye to this reality and to all the other impacts of climate change. In Saskatchewan, we've had record droughts in the last few years, and of course around the world, we're seeing more and more evidence of water scarcity, severe heat waves, the loss of our coral reef ecosystems, the undermining of so many ecosystems around the world by climate change. And climate change represents a major threat to human health. As the UN has emphasized, as the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change has emphasized, the evidence is overwhelming that coal-fired power needs to be phased out, and the Saskatchewan government is choosing to ignore all that scientific evidence in planning to refurbish our coal-fired power plants in this province. The Saskatchewan Environmental Society strongly believes that we need to build a renewable energy future in Canada, and that Saskatchewan needs to be an example of that. We're very conscious of the fact that Mario was talking about Canada's high greenhouse gas emissions. On a per capita basis, Saskatchewan's greenhouse gas emissions are 3.5 times the national average. And it's not just on the coal decision that the government of Saskatchewan is challenging the federal government's attempts to bring greenhouse gas emissions down in Canada. The federal government is also, of course, has adopted a law around industrial emitters, heavy industrial emitters, needing to pay a carbon tax. In Saskatchewan, that amounts to well over $400 million a year. And once again, the Saskatchewan government is ignoring federal law in that regard by dropping the collection of the carbon tax by heavy industrial emitters in this province. So I just want to emphasize it's not just the province is challenging the coal decision that the federal government is requiring coal phase out. It's also challenging other federal laws related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Canada and failing to comply with federal laws. And that's very, very concerning to us. So those are key reasons why we're involved in this application. I just want to thank Glenn Wright for the work he's doing on a pro bono, free of charge, in terms of representing us legally. It's very, very much appreciated, and we're happy to be joining Citizens for Public Justice and the individual applicants in trying to strike down the coal decision that the provincial government has made. Thanks so much for the chance to be part of the webinar today, and Mario, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your wisdom. And I will just echo that and say another thanks to Glenn for his incredible generosity of spirit for leading us into that legal action, again, pro bono, for no compensation whatsoever. So thanks for that strong spirit. And yeah, none of that would have been possible without Glenn. So thank you, Glenn, again. Now to another exciting applicant, Kike. I introduced you initially, but please go ahead.
Hello. My name is Kike Dewick. I'm 12 years old and I live in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is on Treaty 4 territory. I've been inspired to participate in this coal case because as I've learned about climate change, it just makes it seem unreasonable by the Saskatchewan government to continue coal. And in my past, I've tried to convince the Saskatchewan government that we needed more substantial action through multiple forms. For example, I've gained more than 500 signatures on a petition with my climate club. And I've also done multiple strikes in front of the legislature building. And I've even talked to the Ministry of the Environment personally, along with some other youth. But it seems like he is set on his plan. And so I hope that legal action will make sure that he actually makes and the and the Saskatchewan party as a whole, that they will actually take action. And I've seen that the way that they're acting isn't taking into account any of the climate regulations throughout the past, including the Paris Agreement, which was previously mentioned, but technically they are a signature of, and they are required to uphold that. And they're not doing what is necessary to combat climate change. And I don't think they're thinking enough about the future. This makes me feel really sad, and like the government won't take in the people of Saskatchewan, especially the youth's view, and it's not considering our future. And one thing that makes me feel especially sad on that is that they are doing this after enforcing this, and it being one thing that they were actually completing, and then them going back on that. And that makes me feel really sad. It makes me angry. And and climate change and the effects of coal will directly affect me, cuz especially because of the wildfire smoke. And it's hard to go outside last summer because of migraines that it gave me, and it's been hard to do sports. And the winters seem to also be getting shorter, and there's just it's a more of a wet cold, and that's hard. And there's more droughts and then more big heavy rainstorms that I've seen cause a lot of damage. And it pains me to see that people across Saskatchewan and Canada and the world are going to be in an even worse situations because of the effects of the action our government are taking. Climate change will have a bunch of indirect and sometimes unrecognizable ways that it affects us, like vector-borne diseases. Because recently, Lyme disease occurred in Saskatchewan, which has never happened before. And it's also causing, like, conflicts because of dwindling water resources. And it's also one of the causes of the Syrian civil war, which has been terrible. And the same goes with conflicts in the Middle East and Sudan. And according to multiple studies, and I'm probably sure that the person from Kate will speak about this more, but for approximately every 4,000 tons of CO2 emission, there'll be about one climate-related death. This means that the 13.6 million tons of CO2 emitted by Saskatchewan's energy section, which a lot of that is because of coal, will cause approximately 3,400 deaths because of those emissions. That's terrible. And these are just some of the things that drive me to action. Like, I just don't understand why the Saskatchewan government is relying on old data that has not been reviewed and aren't considering the cost and the people who will be very affected, even more than us in Saskatchewan. And that just makes me really, really disappointed in our provincial government because I know they can do more. That's kind of all I have to say, but yeah, I just really wish that the Saskatchewan government would take serious action, and they don't seem to be. And so it makes me like, I don't feel like I should have to be like in this court case right now, and they should be taking action without people having to ask for a judicial review of their things. They should just know better. Anyways, yeah, I'm gonna give it back to Mario.
Thank you so much, Kike. That was wonderful, inspirational, educational. I learned a lot. And yeah, I'm charged up and want to do more now. So thank you, Kike. That is great. And I trust some people here will have questions for you then. Yes. And now we will transition to Matthew. Thank you, Matthew, for bringing the Manitoba perspective.
Thank you, Mario. Burning coal to produce electricity. Somebody needs to say, stop, wake up, don't you see the brick wall we're headed for? And it seemed to me that this was my moment to raise my voice, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to do so. Friends don't let friends drive drunk, and friends don't let friends burn their own house down, which is what burning more coal is literally doing to the only home we all share in this universe. And friends really is what we are as Manitobans and Saskatchewanians, even if some of us cheer for the Blue Bombers and some cheer for the Rough Riders. I personally have friends and family in both provinces. I've already had a significant journey grappling with climate change that has led me to this point of asking for a judicial review of the Saskatchewan government's decision to extend the operation of its coal-fired electricity generation. I worked for almost 12 years as an agricultural climate change specialist with the Manitoba government. My job was to understand greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from farming, and to understand how the climate is changing and the implications for agriculture. My job was also to investigate possible ways to reduce agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and possible ways for farms to prepare for a warming and more volatile climate. One of the things I came to understand is that reducing emissions from agriculture is at least as difficult, likely more difficult, as reducing emissions from other sectors, like transportation and like electricity generation. To my understanding, this fact of emission reductions being challenging for everyone simply reinforces the truth that every sector needs to do its part. Those that work in the electricity sector can't say to farmers, you're the ones that have to reduce emissions because it's too costly and risky for us. Just like farmers don't have a leg to stand on if they say, don't talk to us about reducing emissions, we're feeding the world. Transformation is required everywhere. At the same time as I was working as a climate change specialist, my family and I were making emission reductions decisions in our personal life. We built a small energy efficient wood heated home. We installed a large solar array. We bought an electric vehicle. We joined with 2 other families to buy a farm, and we worked at organic farming and producing food in a way that was good for the earth. We were attempting to walk the walk, as they say. However, we've come to realize that personal action is not enough. Transformative change is required at a societal and civilizational scale. Several years ago, when my wife wanted to restart her teaching career, I resigned from my government job to focus on family and farming. We raise dairy goats as well as a small herd of cattle. We also are involved in market gardening and have a small flock of laying hens and a few beehives. I have the privilege of getting up every morning and working with soil and plants and animals, feeling the sun and the wind on my skin under the wide open sky. On most days, if the bugs aren't too bad and the weather not too harsh, I feel overwhelmingly blessed. We live on a quarter section that includes pastures, trees, and wetlands, and is bordered on 2 sides by the Brokenhead River. At times, it really does feel like a little bit of paradise. I do, however, frequently find myself concerned about what the future holds for this place, just as I am concerned about the future of the world beyond the borders of my farm. This summer, the obvious reminder of a world in distress has been the wildfire smoke and the air quality alerts. In June, the high school provincial track and field championships were canceled due to poor air quality. My daughter competes at a fairly high level, so we were all somewhat disappointed with that. Nevertheless, she brushed it off and kept on training for the next competition. Under normal circumstances, a parent might say, good for her. However, because of the smoky air, I had to question whether to tell her not to train and whether she was doing long-term damage to her health by breathing smoky air deep into her lungs. Besides wildfires, I am expecting severe weather to become more frequent and more severe. On our farm, we have had heavy rains destroy crops, and we have had heat waves kill chickens. From looking at historical records, I know that even more extreme precipitation and even hotter heat waves have happened here before. I also know that as heat trapping gases continue to accumulate, our atmosphere gets warmer, and the likelihood of torrential rains and killer heat waves increases. I am hopeful that this legal action will raise awareness of the folly of our current trajectory of treating the atmosphere that we all share as a dumping ground for our emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. That was so beautiful and poetic. You should add writer to your bio next time. That was great. Thank you. And now we will hear from Sabahat, who is so generous to join us at last minute to add her medical expertise. Sabahat.
Sure. Thank you for introducing me. I'm just going to try to share my screen here, and you let me know if you see my presenter view or the view you're supposed to see. I think this one should be good. Can you see my notes in that one?
1 second, we're just waiting for it to load. No, you're good. We're seeing what we're supposed to see.
Okay, lovely. Sorry, give me 1 second here. Okay, thank you for introducing me, Mario. My name is Sabahat. I'm a fourth-year medical student at the University of Saskatchewan and Saskatoon campus. I'm also one of the co-leads for CAPE Saskatchewan, which stands for the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. On top of this, I was the previous environmental and sustainability representative at our Student Medical Society of Saskatchewan and worked on starting the glove recycling initiative at our CLRC, which is our teaching session. And then I've been working on some research in the background, just trying to make the operating rooms a little bit more sustainable. Today, though, I'll be talking about the critical health impacts of coal power in our province and why transitioning to clean energy sources is essential for public health. I'm also feeling a little sick today, so I apologize in advance for any coughing fits that I have throughout this presentation. Before I dive in, though, let me briefly introduce CAPE. So we are a group of health professionals who advocate for environmental health policies based on scientific evidence. Our work happens at the intersection of health, justice, and the environment. As physicians and health professionals, we believe we have a responsibility to speak out when policies threaten public health. These are some of the members of our team just in the background. Coal-fired plants are major sources of air pollution. According to the National Pollutant Release Inventory, Saskatchewan's coal plants are the largest industrial source of nitrogen dioxide in the province, emitting over 20,000 tons annually. They're also the largest source of sulfur dioxide and releasing more than 69,000 tons each year. Additionally, they emit significant amounts of fine particulate matter, mercury, other heavy metals, as well as greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. These pollutants directly harm human health through various pathways. Looking at the specific health impacts in Saskatchewan, Health Canada's 2021 report attributed 410 premature deaths in our province to air pollution in 2016 alone. A study by the Canadian Medical Association projected that between now and 2031, Saskatchewan will experience over 2,000 emergency department visits, more than 500 hospital admissions, and approximately 470,000 minor illness days annually due to air pollution. Coal power is a significant contributor to this pollution burden. Without substantial emission reductions, these impacts continue unabated, affecting families across our province. Sorry, let me just get the next slide. There you go. When we look at the cumulative impact between now and 2031, the numbers become even more alarming. Air pollution in Saskatchewan will be responsible for more than 3 million illness days, over 14,000 hospital emergency visits, and between 700 and 2,800 emergency deaths premature deaths during this period. It's crucial to understand that there is no safe level of exposure to these pollutants. The science is clear. Health impacts occur along a continuum, affecting people even at lower concentrations. Every reduction in emission translates to lives saved and illnesses prevented. While air pollution affects everyone, certain groups are particularly vulnerable. Seniors with pre-existing conditions face the highest risk, especially those that already have underlying cardiovascular or respiratory conditions. Children are also particularly vulnerable, with evidence linking coal plant emissions to impaired neurodevelopment, lower birth weight, and increased pediatric respiratory morbidity, particularly in those children who already have asthma. Pregnant women exposed to air pollution face increased risks of adverse birth outcomes. Indigenous communities who may have higher rates of pre-existing conditions and often live closer to industrial facilities can face disproportionate impacts. There's a common misconception that coal pollution primarily affects the lungs. While respiratory effects are significant, particularly increased morbidity and mortality, increased asthma exacerbations, COPD exacerbations, respiratory infections, and lung cancers, cardiovascular impacts actually cause more deaths. Fine particulate matter from coal plants can enter the bloodstream and trigger inflammation, which affects the heart and blood vessels. This leads to increased risk of heart attacks, strokes, arrhythmias, high blood pressure, and other cardiovascular diseases. Both short-term spikes in pollution and long-term exposure increases mortality risk. This means that even on days when air quality seems acceptable, chronic exposure continues to damage cardiovascular health. The health impact of coal power also translates to substantial economic costs. These include direct healthcare system costs for emergency visits, for hospitalizations, and for medications. There are significant costs from lost productivity when people miss work due to illness or to take care of sick family members. The reduced quality of life for those suffering from chronic conditions has real economic and social costs. And perhaps most significantly, the economic value of lives that are cut short by preventable pollution is enormous. According to a Government of Canada report, these costs are estimated at about $130 million annually in Saskatchewan alone. Costs that are largely externalized from electricity prices, but paid by our healthcare system and our communities. The decision to extend coal plants to 2050 represents a dangerous reversal that would have serious consequences. It means accepting continued preventable deaths and illnesses for decades to come. It places a disproportionate burden on our most vulnerable populations. It increases the strain on our already challenged healthcare system. It exacerbates climate change impact, which themselves threaten public health through extreme weather, wildfires, and changing disease patterns, which we've sort of already heard about. And it imposes enormous economic costs of inactions that far outweigh the costs of transition. So these are a couple of the recommendations that Cape Saskatchewan has. So first, we recommend reversal of the decision to extend the coal plants beyond 2030. We recommend accelerating transition to renewable energy alternatives that don't compromise public health. We recommend that the government implement stronger air quality standards and monitoring. We also recommend the government consider health costs in all energy policy decisions and have increased support for affected communities in transition. So in conclusion, coal power has significant measurable health impacts on Saskatchewan residents. Extending coal plants means accepting preventable deaths and illnesses for decades to come. The clean energy transition is both necessary for public health and entirely possible with today's technology. As health professionals, we have a responsibility to advocate for policies that protect health, especially when the most vulnerable members of our society are at the greatest risk. Health of Saskatchewan's residents depends on decisive action now. We can power our province without sacrificing our health, and we have a moral obligation to do so. All right, and here's just some of the key references that inform our presentation today. These represent some peer-reviewed research, government reports, and collaborative studies by health and environmental organizations. If you'd like to explore these further, please do so. And thank you so much for your attention today. If you'd like to learn more about the issues, about this issue, or get involved with CAPE's advocacy work, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can find more information on our website, reach us by email at sk@cape.ca, or follow us on social media. I think we're going to have time for questions at the end, so we'll do that then. Stop
Wonderful.
sharing.
Thank you so much, Sabahat. I am so glad that I was adamant to bring on someone from Cape, because it's such a crucial perspective. And again, as I mentioned before, everybody join. I think it's one that we don't speak about enough. And if we don't speak about it enough, we don't realize its crucial nature. So thank you, Sabahat. And last but not least, Sherry, give us that podcast host treatment to end on a high note.
Oh, goodness. I'd just be asking the questions if that was the case. But I thought I'd spend my few minutes here sharing with you all why I spend my time doing this. There's two personal reasons I believe are pivotal for me being a climate advocate, and maybe some of them you can relate to. One comes down to math. Okay, I know not everyone loves math. I've always enjoyed math and patterns and how things connect and repeat and build on one another. And when you study nature, whether it's through physics and chemistry, ecology, biology, meteorology, you see patterns emerging. And the laws of nature are written into atoms and energy and structured in patterns. And when we pay attention to those patterns, it gives you the ability to predict possibilities. For example, our Earth wobbles and tilts and changes its orbit. The Milankovitch cycle, it's called. It changes our climate over thousands of years, and I'm sure those that are involved in climate advocacy have heard people talking about it, how our climate changes. Well, it predicts we should be cooling, but that's not happening. It's important to ask why. We believe we are powerful and knowledgeable as species, but then somehow deny that we have the capacity to alter what happens on our planet. And that just doesn't make sense to me. When we look at nature's patterns, we discover things that help us make better decisions. And that's what draws me in, that sense of discovery and alignment. But math and science aren't the only factors. The other pillar of my advocacy is empathy. We know there are people whose livelihoods and families are already being impacted by the changes in our climate. Our worsening forest fires are just one example. Our poor forest management practices are bad enough, but our emissions are like pouring gasoline on it. We have to stop. When I volunteered with Red Cross, I got to see the impact on our neighbors firsthand. Those people matter. It matters when people can't insure their homes due to increased risk. Try and sell your home without insurance, being able to insure it. Tuvla has plans already in place to be evacuated before 2050 because of rising sea levels, and has immigration agreements in place already because of that. Those people matter. We are also in the midst of increasing levels of extinction. Those beings matter. The impact of human actions is far-reaching and reach into our future. Our kids and our grandkids matter. I have 12 grandkids, and I don't want them to have to face those realities. We need to take responsibility for our part, even here in Saskatchewan. We have been asked for decades to take these small personal actions, but we have to make these large systemic changes in our community too. Climate change isn't an on-off switch, it's a dimmer switch. And thus, to me, this decision matters. We know future people will face enormous challenges, financial, social, international conflicts, as Kike mentioned, and a growing strain of natural disasters, just like we do now, and likely worse. So we're choosing to face today's challenges the best we can so that tomorrow's challenges are not insurmountable. And we have to stop using the excuse that we haven't done it, so it can't be done. We have to start somewhere. Going back to the theme that has been mentioned about a just transition, empathy also makes me realize that there are challenges in changing our energy system. It's not just a technical or scientific problem, it's also a human one. People's livelihoods and identities are tied to that industry, and for them, this is threatening. And if we're serious about building a sustainable future, we have to be just as serious about supporting those people and ensuring they have new opportunities, security, and dignity in the transition. We're all related in the web of life, and it's important we bring everyone along. So in the end, my climate advocacy is about two things working together: math, patterns that predict what's possible and sustainable, and empathy, that commitment to make sure that no beings are left behind and we work towards a better future. And if nothing else, wanting to share that better future together is where I hope we're the same. So even though advocacy can be different, the purpose is clear. We're choosing to act now so future conditions are better. And that's why I keep going and why I believe this work in Saskatchewan matters. Thanks for listening, and back to you, Mario.
Thank you, Sher. That was all I hoped for from your speaking engagement. Thanks for ending us on a hopeful note. And yeah, thanks for showing us what matters out there. And thanks everyone for listening. Now is what I assume, I hope what you've been waiting for. Let's open the floor. Drop your questions in the chat. You can also use the raise hand function, which you can find under the React button if you have your Zoom window open, and you can ask your question out loud. We'll bring as many voices as possible with the time constraints. Any questions? People who know me know that I am okay with awkward silences. Oh, here we go. Callan. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but please go ahead.
Yeah, Kalen. Thanks. Yeah, thank you all for speaking. This was really interesting. Um, I think like a really common kind of talking point you would hear from people who are opposed to this kind of action is just that it's not technically possible to get off of coal for Saskatchewan. I was wondering if maybe someone could like comment on that. What does it like technically look like? What should Sask Power be doing to kind of transition off rapidly?
Thank you. I can take a first try at this, and I trust Glenn and Peter may have some things to add. As Glenn briefly mentioned, Estevan is one of the sunniest places in Canada. I also stole this from Rob Halliday from SES. Southern Saskatchewan has huge potential when it comes to solar and wind resources. I also look at Ontario and Alberta, two provinces that are namely fossil fuel dependent, and Alberta has closed down its last coal-fired generation plant in 2024, so more than a year ago, actually June 2024. And Ontario closed down its last coal-fired power plant in 2014, so more than a decade ago. Many provinces around the country are launching recruitment campaigns for renewable energy, which we hoped would have been the first approach that Saskatchewan would have gone with. And we think if they decide to do that, launch fair and sort of equitable leveling the playing field between traditional energy sources and nuclear energy sources, we are confident that, renewable energy sources, we are confident that renewable sources will come out on top, especially in southern Saskatchewan, and we think that would be sufficient for powering the grid. Another solution that is systematic and that Citizens for Public Justice pushes for on a federal level is a smart, interconnected east to west energy grid. Canada is blessed with a large geography, and as much as we can sort of silo ourselves within Saskatchewan and say, oh, we don't have enough renewable sources, an interconnected energy grid will actually solve this problem very, very easily. How? For Alberta, for instance, they can rely on the hydro dams in BC if they have an interprovincial energy grid. For us in Ontario, we can rely on the renewable energy coming from Quebec, which is a very clean grid across Canada, famously so. And for the folks in Saskatchewan, they can also rely on the abundance of renewable sources that comes from Manitoba with its own hydro resources. So two things: recruitment for renewable energy on fair terms, because we often notice that those recruitment initiatives disincentivize renewable sources of energy, and smart interconnected east to west energy grid. Glenn or Peter or anybody else?
Yes, Peter here. I would just add, Mario, that another area that it would really benefit SaskPower to invest in is electricity conservation, electricity efficiency. There's the potential for several hundred megawatts of energy savings in this province. We've got a situation where 150 large companies utilize 60% of the electricity that's generated in the province. So it's particularly important to have electricity conservation initiatives in the industrial sector. And US states like California, Vermont have demonstrated very clearly how successful those kind of conservation and efficiency initiatives can be if and they're much cheaper than a lot of the options for generating electricity are. So it's also good news for consumers. Thanks, Mario.
Thanks for this, Peter. Yeah, and as people mentioned in the chat, the opportunity cost of building up renewables is the lowest, as multiple people have mentioned the UN. So it is not only just cleaner energy, but also cheaper energy. Any other questions? Thank you, Kaylin. It was a wonderful question. Amy, please. Oh, you're muted, Amy.
Just a really quick thank you to everybody who's involved in this, and particularly to Glenn and the other lawyers who are giving just so much of their time for fighting for all of us. And so, yeah, just my absolute appreciation and gratitude.
Thank you, Amy, and I echo that gratitude to Glenn as well. Jim.
I guess I want to add a little bit of what I would call international context to this. One thing that's happening in a number of countries around the world, like for instance, if you look at India, 70% of the new electrical generation in India is solar. So they're clearly moving substantially away from fossil fuels. The country of Kenya should be 100% renewable by 2035, so within the next 10 years. The other one, which I guess we keep hearing about to some extent, is the United States, but right now, wind plus solar is actually outproducing coal in the US. It's also outproducing nuclear as well. and that the mix of all the renewables actually generates 30% of the electricity in the US. And during that same time, fossil gas is actually dropped by 6% back in May of last year. So things are definitely moving in the right direction, across the country or across the world, I should say. And so therefore we think we're going to be able to, produce oil and gas and stuff like that and sell it to the rest of the world. Well, the rest of the world is switching already. And if you think of China dropping, like I've heard that they've actually peaked in oil production from last year, so that in fact oil use and coal are actually starting to level off and starting to go down. So we can't be selling our coal, even for that matter, to China or India. So I'll just give you some international context to what you're talking about in Saskatchewan. I think we clearly could be moving much faster on most of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, and I'll just bring together my thoughts on some of the comments that were brought up so far: conservation, energy conservation, heat, and insulation. All of these have been proven to have the best return on investment. And as Peter said, in terms of conserving energy, China, as Jim alluded to previously, is putting out a sort of volume of renewable energy generation that is multiple times that of Western countries combined, just by the sheer fact that they produce most of the world's solar panels. And as much as Canadians like to hate on the US, and certainly a pastime of mine as well, our per capita emissions are still higher than those of United States citizens. So if you take the total emissions per capita from the US, which is the biggest economy in the world, and divide them by each person, we still, as Canadians, on average, produce more emissions. So we certainly need to look in-house. Any more questions? Perhaps one last one. David, please. David, if you're already talking, I think you're still muted. Okay, David, we can't hear you. I think you're still muted. Try again, and whenever you're able to intervene, we'll be happy to hear the question.
Or feel free to also drop it in the chat if that's easier.
Yes, and that goes to anybody else. Any other questions? Okay, perhaps I'll, yeah, sorry, David, go ahead.
It would help if I hit the unmute button very quickly. It's almost difficult not to get angry when this decision came out. The magnitude of emissions we're talking about here, those coal plants are pumping out about 10 million tons annually, and continuing that on for another 25 years is 250 million tons of CO2 emissions. That excludes consideration of the particulates and mercury, et cetera, that have more localized effects. And I mean, the entire province of Ontario in 2023 is 150 million tons. There's not a chance Canada can arrive at net zero emissions if this initiative goes forward. Not a chance. And in terms of the economics, and maybe if Glenn or Peter would just comment on this here, you keep hearing, oh, we can't afford this, we can't afford it, and yet the studies are out there that say the cost of a transition in Saskatchewan, it's almost trivial. It's, you know, within the error of economic growth models. It's not that expensive for us to do this, especially if we've got transmission corridors in place. And it begs one to just kind of look a little deeper and say, what is the underlying motivation that's going on here? I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, you can come up with almost some, you hate to say it, but sinister objectives, if you will, with protection of existing industries that are polluting us right now. So I just, you know, if Glenn or Peter want to comment on that, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for this, David. Yeah, I'll allow Glenn.
Well, I'd certainly like to hear what Peter has to say on this as well, but this is one of the hallmarks of why we think this decision is unreasonable, because there's no independent economic analysis of the cost to implement the coal decision, nor was there any sort of comparison of other options in terms of the life cycle cost of electricity. And what I find really frustrating is listening to the narrative of the media surrounding this story, and you know, people who are proponents of that are congratulating this coal decision. Most of them are saying we have no other options. If we don't use gas or we don't use coal, they're saying there is no other
I
option.
just brought volume down to nothing.
But what I think we really need here is an honest, transparent discussion of all of the generation options and a life cycle cost of electricity shown to the public, because I think then it would be very difficult to make a reasonable decision that would say we have to use coal, because there are so many other options that are available.
Peter?
Yeah, just to add to what Glenn said in response to David's question. David, I agree with you that it's impossible for Canada to meet its greenhouse gas emissions target, which is at least a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions at the national level by 2030, if Saskatchewan continues to do very, very little to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's no sign of emissions coming down in any significant way in this province, with the one exception being that the federal government has required Saskatchewan to implement its methane emission reduction targets in the oil and gas industry. And in terms of the first round of targets, Saskatchewan has complied and has had some success in that regard. But with that exception, Saskatchewan has failed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on pretty well every front. And now this coal decision really illustrates the determination of the Saskatchewan government to attempt to unravel Canada's climate change policies. So we've got a situation in Saskatchewan where it's producing about 4% of Canada's electricity, but accounts for about 24% of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with electricity production in Canada. So that's clearly a very unreasonable situation that Saskatchewan should feel obligated to correct, and we're seeing government policy that's exactly the opposite. I just want to say that on the energy conservation and energy efficiency front, you know, there's a lot of jobs to be had in that arena, as well as cost savings for both industry and Saskatchewan taxpayers. And it's an area that has really received very little attention from the government of Saskatchewan. And I also want to emphasize that this court case is not against SaskPower, which is the Crown utility, the Crown electrical utility in this province. It's against the government of Saskatchewan. SaskPower never, in any of its scenario planning and in all of its public consultations, it never once proposed to violate federal law and keep coal-fired power stations in this province running past 2029. It always intended to comply with federal law. So this is a cabinet decision in Saskatchewan that is insisting that the coal-fired power plants be refurbished. The fact that SaskPower never planned to keep running the coal-fired power plants past 2029 emphasizes that, of course, it's possible to phase coal out in this province if one's determined to do it. all kinds of other scenarios were, 4 other scenarios were developed, all of which would have accomplished that goal. This decision really is unreasonable. And that's one of the things, as Glenn has pointed out, that we're arguing before the Court of King's Bench.
Thank you, Peter. And just very quickly to add to the list of reasons, and then we'll hear from you, Kike, to add to the list of reasons for why we think, as one of the applicants, this decision is unreasonable. There is the question of financial cost. What is the opportunity cost that Glenn has mentioned? There was no independent economic analysis, but according to a recent report in the Globe and Mail that I just sent the link to, the Saskatchewan government has budgeted $900 million, almost $1 billion, just to refurbish the plants. That says nothing about the cost of keeping the plant running, or the other non-economic costs like health impacts that we discussed on this webinar. But that just those $900 million are going to be paid by taxpayers, or really ratepayers, if they offload those costs onto Sask Power customers. And again, it doesn't mention anything about the opportunity cost of having invested those $900 million, or probably less, would be required into recruiting renewable electricity. There's also the huge risk of having those coal-fired power plants become stranded assets, whether that's because we win our legal challenge in a year or two after the government, as Glenn mentioned, invests the $900 million, which it will begin to invest this year, or budget this year, or because the federal government stops its equivalency agreement, which the federal government now has an equivalency agreement signed with the government of Saskatchewan, in order to allow them to continue using coal despite the coal-fired regulations, which did state that all coal-fired power plants should be offline by 2030. So the federal government does have the power to cancel this agreement anytime. So if the federal government decides that there should be no more coal in Saskatchewan, those $900 million are gone, are wasted. They're what we call stranded assets. The decision also was not preceded by public consultations, as it was mentioned earlier. And such a major question in terms of the makeup of the electricity grid in Saskatchewan, we think should be preceded by public consultation. The way the decision was also announced was unreasonable. It was announced in a private letter to Sask Power employees. It was never shared in public with Saskatchewanians. Anyways, Kike, and then we'll end.
Yeah, on that front, I would like just to say that I feel like the government of Saskatchewan, by investing in coal, is not giving the people of Saskatchewan what they should. Like, it makes less sense than to invest in renewables, and it will probably cost them a lot more money to invest in coal, and yet they're continuing to do it. And I just don't understand their logic there, because they're gonna lose money, and they're investing so much in there, and they have the chance of having to just, like Mario said, just all that being a wasted investment. And also, so far, to my research that I've done, I found that Saskatchewan has the highest GDP emissions per capita of any province in Canada, but also the highest GDP emissions of capita. Their GDP emissions per capita is higher than any country in the world, which is GHG, which is absolutely crazy, and they're not doing anything on that like many other countries are. And I just feel like they're kind of just letting the province down as a whole. And though it seems like there might be short-term gains now, even to the Saskatchewan government, I don't understand how they can make more sense to continue coal. Anyways, yeah, that's all I kind of had to say.
Thank you so much again, everyone. I have just two final words here to share with you. I hope you can see my screen. Um, the Again, a huge thank you to all of our speakers and to everyone who joined and engaged thoughtfully tonight. If you would like to stay connected, and we would love for you to stay connected, as Glenn said, please subscribe to CPJ's Justice e-News and consider making a donation to support this legal action. And Etienne just shared the link. Please also consider becoming a CPJ member or a member of CPJ. Any donation makes you a CPJ member for a year, with perks including our biannual publication, The Catalyst, delivered to your door. But here's a more important reason for why we have such a low barrier structure for our donations. That members like us, like that means for us more than just financial support. We use your membership data to conduct our lobbying effort, or the number of members that we have. And that helps us do this effectively by saying, look, that many people didn't only join us by signing a petition or attending an event, but they've also donated their hard-earned money because they believe so deeply in our cause, which, needless to say, makes our advocacy significantly more effective. And that being said, your financial support also sustains our crucial advocacy. So please donate if you are able. Efforts such as public education, community mobilization, and advocacy like this. Citizens for Public Justice is an entirely member-funded organization because we do systemic advocacy and public education like this. We don't qualify for many of the grants given to direct service organizations. And in order to conduct our government relations work effectively and with integrity, to be able to freely criticize the government, we also don't accept direct funding from governmental sources. So CPJ is an entirely member-funded organization, and small donations make up the majority of our donation revenue. So feel free to pick whether you want to donate to the dedicated legal fund or CPJ's general donations page, which are both in the chat, but we kindly ask you to consider joining our fight however you're able. And if that doesn't look like making a financial donation, we ask you to subscribe to our newsletter just to stay involved. Thanks again for all of your work. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to email me. My email is on the screen. And thank you again for staying 5 minutes past our time. We really appreciate it. We hope you have a lovely night and take care.